If we may, let's just introduce Mr. Brian Haferkamp. He's just released a new game, Uptempo Basketball. You see this logo focusing on that mighty electric 1985-86 NBA season. I remember it as a 20-year-old non-basketball fan. It certainly captivated me. So what a great way to start. You'd released On Baseball about a year or so ago, I believe.
Yeah, it's called On Base Baseball. Yeah,
On Base Baseball.
and April, the end of April in 2021, that was the official start.
Awesome. And you've
Yeah,
also got something called Advanced Stats Football, and you've got 9
yeah,
tutorial videos there that we'll link to. We'll also link to the live stream video in which you told us a little bit about yourself. You're a web developer. You played out of the park baseball in the early 2000s, and thank you so much. It's really curious to talk about your philosophy and your motivations.
Okay. Yeah, sounds great.
So how did you start getting into sports, and what led you to the world of sports simulation?
I've been, obviously I played sports from a young age, actually playing. I grew up in Texas, so sort of a rite of passage to play football. And so you just wind up playing football most of your life. Um, and I was sort of a heady player, so I was a good player, but I was also thinking through the game a lot. And as I got into my 20s, I wasn't playing football or basketball or anything as much as I was before, and came across different sports simulations, mostly video games. Obviously, I'm under 45, so most people my age have grown up playing video games our whole life. And I started to find simulation video games as opposed to just arcade or your regular Madden type video games. Or they were in the 90s. It was sort of the heyday, so they were building in franchise modes for the first time and GM modes and stuff like that. And really, after a while, you get tired of beating the computer, and you sort of go over into the GM mode and see if you can do it without actually doing all the cheats and uh, getting around the computer in the ways that you know how. So I really just it grew from there. Just sort of a love of watching what happens behind the scenes and dealing with the business side of it, and maybe early 2000s, I found Out of the Park baseball, which it was still kind of early in the development of Out of the Park back then, and I really felt like the 2004 or five, just before they sort of made the last big change that they made to it. But right there was like a sweet spot where it was still fun and it wasn't laborious with too much data, but there was enough data, and then it was kind of a sweet spot for me. I wish I wish it still worked on a computer, but I don't think it will work on anything anymore except maybe an emulator. Um, and really just played the heck out of it all the time, and was just trying to see, can I develop a farm system? Can I lead teams to a championship and stuff like that without actually having to make decisions on the field. Um, and so from there, just sort of a love of GM games kind of grew out of that. And I think that sort of pushes you over into text-based sims, which, if you can find them, are, highly analytical, data-driven. As I've sort of pushed over into, especially with baseball, more sabermetrics and analytics, and actually reading through sabermetric journals and listening to people talk about the actual science of baseball. It sort of opens up a new avenue for me as far as a sports gamer is concerned, and we see it kind of creeping into telecasts, and people are making reference to certain numbers that they didn't make reference to before. And so I feel like it's sort of a moment now where a game like On Base can actually take hold, because that's sort of what it's based off of. It originally was based off of war. I wanted to create a video game, basically, a web based video game that was based off of war, and quickly realized over the next 6 months, you know, that war wasn't a great thing to base a video game off of because you just run into some problems. Ozzie Smith is a high war player that doesn't hit the ball, 40 home runs a season. So you run into some inherent issues with high war players where you had to get a little bit more granular with the statistics. And so thankfully, that granularity is out there, especially in baseball. And I was able to sort of parse out offense and defense a little bit more easily,
Hmm.
and come up with something that I think is it's unique. It feels like a board game, maybe that you played like a basic APA or something like that. But it's based off of something completely different. It's completely objective, statistically based,
Hmm.
not objectively based rating systems. So I guess that's really the journey for me, both in terms of video games and, I didn't grow up playing tabletop games. I grew up playing video games.
Sure.
But I can see how those two worlds cross over. Um, and especially in the text-based sim world, you're essentially creating an offline text-based sim when you're creating a tabletop baseball game. So I feel like there's some fluidity between both the digital and the non-digital in those areas.
For sure.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that constitute realism then to you? I mean, how much in-game realism are you aiming for? You know, if
Hmm.
you're kind of looking more at the GM mode, I mean, what are the data points that you focus on the most, and the kind of aspects of the game that are, kind of the real blood and guts of each sport?
I think some people are really good at doing simulation, and I would not say that when you pick up one of my games it's going to be a simulation.
Hmm.
So I'll just put that out there.
Sure.
I'm not necessarily unabashedly unashamed about it. I wish I could do that kind of math and heavy lifting and things like that, but in the end, whenever I'm looking at a game, because usually when I start developing a game, I'm looking to see what's out there. I'm watching videos, just sort of like everybody else. You're looking to see what's out there and how it plays and that type of thing. So whenever I'm going through them, a lot of games, I just got to be honest, I can't make it through
Sure.
the first quarter of a basketball game, or I can't make it through, a little bit of it. And it could be my age. Maybe people will say, well, that's because you're a young person. But I really think it has to do with the fact that I grew up playing really fun video games. And in order to have a fun game, sometimes you have to stretch reality. Um, it's a little bit like a movie, right? Sort of, if you have a fun movie, there's a stretch of reality. I mean, there's enough reality to feel like you're in the universe that's been created, but it's a little bit of a stretch because otherwise it becomes kind of work. and, and I don't really do video games or game any kind of games for it to be work. Video games have always been entertainment for me, so I'm not trying to reproduce anything.
Hmm.
And one of the beauties of using analytics, especially advanced analytics, is the way it consolidates the numbers into a singular number. So you can take many parts and you can consolidate them into one singular number. So, like for on base, I have one batting number, and that batting number is batting runs, which is like a league and ballpark adjusted weighted runs above average. So, how many runs above the average major leaguer is this person? And then it's weighted for their ballpark and for the era that they play in. So it's a cross era. You can 15 batting runs in 1922 is equivalent to a 15 batting runs in 2022. So in that way, you take a lot of offensive information and you consolidate it into a single number, recognizing that you have an accurate number, but you haven't had to take into it. There's not this massive formula that you've had to recreate or, you know, try to reproduce individual numbers. And so by doing that, by using those statistics, I'm able to create a singular number, which is helpful and makes the game super simple,
Hmm.
really, in a lot of ways, and makes the mechanics really easy because you only have one number really that you're rolling against.
Hmm.
And then, but behind that one number is a lot of information and a lot of actual statistical data, not subjective ratings that you're sort of adding together to create a 22. It's not, it's an actual number that can be reproduced and calculated. And that, to me, that's important. That objectivity is important, that the game mechanics are based off of real numbers is important. Um, and part of that is because I just want to get the players into the universe and then allow the dice, allow the sort of the randomness of the situation, the dice or the cards or whatever you're using to sort of make the play happen. You're you're allowing that randomness to sort of take full hold of the game. And so are they going to, is Barry Bonds going to be better than Ozzie Guillen? Yes. Is he going to be a lot better at some things? Yes. Is sometimes Ozzie Guillen going to get the best? Yes, because that's how it works in real life. Especially with baseball, sort of over time, these players are going to behave exactly like you would expect them to. Um, but I just want to get them into the realm of possibility, not if Barry Bonds hits 32 home runs instead of 48, that I'm upset, you know, because what if he hits 64 the next time that you run it and then you're averaging it out, that it comes out the same or that you get within 6 or 7, either way? Because in a real season, maybe maybe they bring in that closer 1 inning early and he doesn't get that cheapie off of the guy. So there's a lot of stuff that actually happens in baseball, a lot of stuff that happens in sports where it just could go either way. You know, it, how many home runs are wall scrapers? Wind blowing in a little bit and it's caught at the warning track. So
Hmm.
I feel like there's enough actual variation in the world that the variation in my games is realistic.
Okay.
As long as people are performing, superstars are superstars compared to bench players, compared to sort of average. But the reality is, what's the difference between a guy who, so in on base, there's 4 categories, sort of four columns. One is for 30 plus batting runs players, which is those are your perennial MVP, top 15 players in the league, hitters. Then you have the next group, which is a group from 10 to 30, which is essentially those are going to be your all stars, your really good to almost great kind of players, or great players who just didn't quite get into that. Is a 27 batting runs player different than a 32? Probably not in reality. You know what I mean? Like they're very close as a player, but you have to have some sort of line somewhere, that you draw the line between them. But that's what I mean. 4 hits a week and they're up into a different category. 2 hits a month, they're up into a different category. And that's not a lot of production in reality that moves you from one to the other. And I'm seeing the same thing in the basketball game as well. When you look at an entire season, when you look at all of the teams together, they're all within 2, 3% in their 3 point shooting, their 2 point shooting. And sometimes you even points per game, you're like, how in the world did they lose 50 games? Because they scored 112 points a game. How's that even possible? But then you realize they're in a tough division. They had to face Michael Jordan 12 times a year, or, there's all these different sort of factors, or maybe there were injuries on the team that prevented them, or maybe they lost a ton of, you know, games by 2 points. So that's sort of the beauty of the thing is I'm not trying to reproduce it. I'm just trying to reproduce the conditions
Hmm.
in which the players performed so that then now they can perform on the table. And so you're going to get some variation, but I think that variation makes it really exciting because you don't know that it's going to be X number of home runs or you don't know that the Bulls are going to win 72 again. Maybe they win 64 and they lost a ton of close games that they didn't lose in real life. So to me, that's there's an excitement to video gaming or gaming. And I hope, and it seems like it with at least the basketball game. I don't know if on base feels that way, but I hope that there's a certain level of excitement, tension, all those sort of visceral parts that we love about sports. I hope that that gets brought to the table.
Excellent. Very well said. There is so much outside of those extremes of the great teams and the great players. There's a lot of a great middle you've kind of got to parse
Mhm.
out, and it's just going to kind of jumble up the way, which is the great, what if for.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you, if you would, maybe give an elevator pitch on all three of your games, just kind of the quick, you use XYZ mechanics to, play head to head, and if there's a solo mode.
Okay. On base baseball uses it's like a classic dice baseball game on steroids. So a modernized version of like the old classic dice baseball games where you just roll them and what happens, right? Sort of the same roots as APBA or Strat that they came out of. I went all the way back to those games from the 1920s to start from that place and begin to, because I'm just learning how to make a game, a tabletop game. So I started at the very basics, beginnings, and created a game that is similar to, say, an APBA basic, but not the same. It's definitely not the same. It's even a little bit more simplistic. You roll, you find a result. There is you go off the pitcher card first, and then the hitter card. If there's no result from the pitcher card, it's based off of the DIPS theory, so defense independent pitching statistics. So I really tried to isolate the players as hitters and pitchers both, and then utilize that in the confrontation. Because to me, the confrontation that is the game, right? The confrontation between the batter and the pitcher is the game, and the rest of it is sort of ancillary because the ball can do all kinds of things once it gets into play. And there are so many things out of your control. So that one is more of a basic roller type game. On base advanced, as simple and not complex as on base is, on base advanced is the total opposite. So you have video game level detail on a tabletop baseball game, literally deciding what kind of pitch do you want to throw from the outset. So do you want to throw a fastball, breaking ball, or a changeup? And then from there, depending on that result, is it in the strike zone? If it's in the strike zone, is there a swing? Like you literally move through the entire at bat point by point, and you don't have a result until you finish. It could be 7 rolls, it could be 3 rolls that you finish the at bat. And to me, it's a pitch by pitch level game, but there's so much detail because we're using Statcast data. So all of the newest Statcast data that I could find, I have incorporated into that game. How many pitches, everything is lefty righty splits. There's no not lefty righty splits. Every single part of the at bat is judged against left right splits. So we have that granularity of data, and I was like, well, that's advanced. So we're going to bring that into the game,
Awesome.
and I'm just going to put as much granularity as I can in here. And it makes for a really unique game, and it feels, if you play it, it moves quickly. You can play it in about an hour and 15 minutes once you sort of get the hang of it. Um, and that's throwing pitch by pitch,
Wow.
so that's kind of a feat to do that,
Oh.
but also it feels like a video game. It feels like you're making that level of decision just like you would if you had a controller in your hand. So to me, that was a fun one to make as well. But I don't know if I could ever do a whole season with 900 players. It's so labor intensive. I would need a whole army of people, and I can't sell it or enough of them to justify the cost. But I have been doing. I did the World Series. I did a couple of all-star teams. So 75 players is doable, but uh, 900 is quite a feat to be able to do that. I have another one called Quick Play Baseball, which is fun, which is just like a super fast one play per half inning. So it's a quick play game, but you do play out the entire 9 innings for each team. Um, and it's based off of more of cards, playing cards, like a deck of playing cards system. So basically, you need a roster and a deck of playing cards, and then you need the situation cards. And the setup is you flip a situation card, and now you're sort of plopped into the middle of an inning. And there's runners at second and third with one out, and the next card that you flip over determines do you score or not. So do you get a hit, and if you hit, you get a hit, do you have a score? Because getting hits doesn't necessarily guarantee a score. So it's a super fun, super fast game, maybe 5 minutes max. You can play an entire 9 inning game. So it's a lot of fun. And there's also I ported it to a digital app, and you can actually play flipping the cards and all that kind of stuff online. So that was a really fun one to make. And it actually is it was the beginning of what came, another game that I'm calling Dog Days Baseball, or I guess it kind of started as Dog Days Baseball. Tabletop Manager is what I was calling it. It had more of a manager focus of sort of plopping you into an inning, and you had to manage your way out of it. So you had these like really complex manager cards that had different options on them, and then you would sort of get into an inning and play out the rest of the inning uh, until you got 3 outs, right? So that was the idea. And then, but I was working on it, and I had this little quick play game, and I just kept thinking this would be really fun to have as just a really fast playing flip a card, bing bang boom, and then you're done. And so I released that, and people have really enjoyed it. Um, I can imagine you playing that with your children, your grandchildren, just as an introduction to baseball. This is what it means when these people are here, and then you score. It's exciting, and it's relatively realistic. You come out, there are 2-to-1 ball games in it, even though you would think maybe that's not true. And there's a little bit of variation with the great players and stuff like that. So to me, that's a really perfect game for an entry level type of game. The football game, it's still a work in progress. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it or not, but it's another one that kind of sits in the mid level of um, laborious or not laborious. It can move quickly once you get the hang of like where to look and stuff like that. But again, based on advanced stats for football, which is not something that people talk about a whole lot. But there is actually quite a bit out there as far as run tendencies this way and that way, and passing tendencies this way and that way, and defensive statistics that we haven't had before that actually help to sort of boil down, defensive performance and stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun. I think in some ways it feels a little laborious to me now. So I'm hoping to maybe speed it up a little bit, maybe give it a better flow. Um, but it's got like this element of big plays that is sort of like the up tempo basketball with the scoring runs. There's like this. I don't know if you remember. We used to play Super Mario Kart all the time on Nintendo 64.
Okay.
And there were like these little special things in these racing games where you could hit something and it would, it would just like shoot you forward, right? It was like this special boost. And I feel like in the football game, in the basketball game, there's like these little special boosts. They're always just kind of right there. You never know when they're going to come, but when they come, it's like they just kind of take you off, and you get that feel, that feel of the momentum swinging, the motion of the game. And I think that that's really uh it's really an important feel to feeling like you're in the game. And so the football game has that. You can break huge runs, you can break huge passes, that type of thing. And it's not just plodding your way down the field. Um, but mm, it's not outrageous. It's not like playing NBA Jam. No, it's not like that. And then with and that's just a roller game, so you're just rolling, but it's a lot like on base advance where you just, you sort of roll until you get to the result. And then the basketball game, which I just released and I'll continue to put out seasons. I have another one almost ready to go already, so that would be 3 seasons. And once I've set up production on it, it's actually not so much to get a season out there. Also, that's an advantage of using statistics
Mm.
is that I can scrape statistics, and that is actually the guts of the game. So you could play some of my games with baseball cards because you have the statistics on the back, and the game engine works with real numbers. So you can actually use those real numbers. But it also helps with these databases online to just be able to scrape data out of the databases. And then I'm not having to do a lot of subjective rating or anything like that to try to figure out a system of comparison between players. That's what they are. Your free throw percentage is 74%. There's no way to get around that, and I don't bump you up or down. I roll against that number. And in that way, they perform mostly like they would in real life. And so uptempo basketball it exists somewhere between fast play and long play. It's probably going to, if you play with all of the individual players, probably going to take you 35 minutes to play a game. Uh, there's a couple different modes. You can play like super fast play mode, which is about 15 minutes, 10 minutes, with just the team cards. So you roll against the team percentages for free throws, 2 points, and 3 point percentages. You use a team defense instead of individuals, or you can break it out on each play and you can decide which guy is going to shoot the ball. uh, did he make it? Was the defense involved? Who was the defender? Who was involved in the play? And so there's sort of a level of specificity or detail that you can get into depending on how you want to play it. The one caveat is that the game is not realistic in the sense of getting details like rebounds,
Mm.
turnovers, assists. You could probably do turnovers and assists and get pretty accurate results, but they don't miss enough for the rebounds to
Mm.
to take hold. So in order to have a game where you do one, two, skip a few, 99, 100, um, you have to, and then get everybody to 115 points.
Mm.
You have to make a lot of shots. So they're going to be shooting about 85% for the most part. And free throws are a little bit more realistic because you just are shooting free throws against their percentage. There's no automatic free throws or anything like that. So those will actually come out a little bit closer. But 2 points and 3 point shots are not going to be true to real life. But I feel like there are a lot of games already on the market that can do true to life or closer to real life way better than I can. I don't have the time or patience, honestly, as a designer to create a game like that. And why would I want to make one more? The game has had a really good reception. I think, especially among casual basketball fans,
Mm.
people who like basketball, but that's not their thing. Maybe they're, Dave Gardner's a hockey guy, and he was just like, you know, I like to play this, even though I'm just kind of watching basketball from the side. And I'm seeing a lot of hockey, football guys who are looking at this and saying, "This feels fast. This feels like not plodding along, and it feels like basketball. It feels like fun." So I think that it's going to hit sort of the casual fan. If you need all the detailed stats and all that kind of stuff, it's not really the game for you.
Mm.
But if you can sort of get past that, I think the feel of the game is going to be fun. Does that make sense? Like it's
Sure.
going to feel like the back and forth of basketball.
It's perfect.
Um, and so that's really When you're designing a game, you have, this is one of the things that I've learned over the years, like I'm an old guy, right? Who's been doing this forever. Over the last 2 years that I've been doing this, there's a trade off between detail and fun when you're designing a game, and you have to move to whichever side you want to do, right? So, I don't want games to be work. I have work, I have yard work, I have all kinds of things that are they're just work, right? And you got to get in, you got to do them, you got to do them well. And then I have fun that I want to be fun. And for me, video games have always just been fun. They've been sort of a cool down to the end of the day. They've been the sort of a chill out time or hang out time with other people. And I think that there are probably a lot of gamers like that, where they don't necessarily want it to be laborious. I don't want to have to do a lot of math while I'm doing this, and I don't want to have to like do so much detail work that I just sort of 3 minutes to resolve, like 3 actual minutes to resolve one possession in a basketball game feels like too much, like overkill to me. When I would watch the baseball games, same thing happens in the baseball games as well. Sometimes they're so detailed, and I just kept thinking like they're taking a lot of effort to draw a very fine line. I can draw an equally good line and take a third of the time to get there. If I leverage advanced stats, if I leverage just a couple of key roles, I can get you there to where 95% of the results are going to be similar, if not the same, but you've taken a lot less time to get there. So that was kind of where I was looking with the baseball initially, and then now with the basketball as well, is really like how many corners as a designer can we cut off so that the game feels like it flows a little more straight line instead of just kind of back and forth, here to there to here to there, here to there. And everything that I do sort of is moving in that direction. So uh, putting results on cards, not charts, limiting the number of peripherals or components that you have to download, making sure that whenever you download a PDF, all you have to do is go print it. So you don't have to fiddle with settings or anything like that unless you're using A4 or something. But you don't have to work to play the game. I'm really trying to take the work out of gaming.
And
Um,
are these all, they sound kind of like solitaire focused. Is there any head-to-head component?
I'm sure that you could play them head to head. I've never actually done that. So for me, I'm developing them as one person. I do know that there is a group who has been playing on base baseball together. They just started a league this summer,
Yes.
and so they are playing some style of head to head. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing that, um, but it's just a baseball game. You know what I mean? Like you can roll for each team and just roll off of your own cards. So whether you're playing with cards or you're playing, I have roster sheet sets, which is every player who ever played in the decade. And so we right now I've got the 1940s up to 2009. So every single player who's ever played in the major leagues, who even if they got in and pinch ran, is included in those decades. So you can buy the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, etc., and you can get every single player, and they're rated with all of the appropriate values that you need in order to play on base baseball. I've just taken essentially what was on the cards before, and I've just transferred that over to a huge roster sheet that you can just download year by year. And then you play the game. You just fill out your scorecard, and you can play right off of your scorecard. So the footprint is really small. You just get sort of unprecedented access to every single player, even if it's a small number of at bats or innings pitched. So um, very happy about that. And some guys really like the small footprint, but they also like just having every single player available. It's like a as played replayer's dream.
Do you have any thoughts about getting into college games or any other sports?
Definitely want to do that. In fact, I'm working on a college version of Uptempo Basketball. I just released three demo teams. So 1990 UNLV, 1990 Loyola Marymount with Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball, and then also 92 Duke, which was one of their great, teams of all time. But it's based off of the same Uptempo engine. It's just, and it's got the same look and feel as Uptempo Basketball. It's just there are a few variations that are going to have to be a little bit different because data for defense is just not the same as it is in the NBA. So I haven't been able to find the equivalent defensive data that I've used in the NBA game. I come from a web development background. The way I approach this industry, I don't know if it rubs anybody wrong. It rubs some people right. They appreciate the transparency and they appreciate the fact that I'm out early talking about stuff before the game is made. So many people have played up tempo basketball before it even went on for sale. Some of that is good for marketing, but some of it is a huge chunk of it is the idea that we can build this thing collaboratively together. I did the same thing with on base baseball. What it does is you get that MVP out there, you get that first prototype out there, and get people playing it, and they'll start telling you things that you never even thought of, things to make the game better. And when you come with a finished product, they still have those thoughts. They still say those things. But now, like, there's this wall where you say, no, it's complete. I've spent 12 years of my life making this complete. It becomes kind of difficult to make those changes, even though these aren't fly by night people. These are people who've been playing these games for 35 years and have passed this on to other generations. And they were playing the original sort of games that all of these things are based off of. So to say your your 30 years of experience playing games, to say that that's not valuable for the creation of something new is, I think, feels like a little bit of a slap in the face to people, and they get frustrated at the bigger companies. I fully recognize, one, I'm a newbie. I didn't grow up playing these games, so I need all the help I can get.
Hmm.
And just having the collective community speak into, that's probably not the best mechanic to use, or you should think about adding this because guys are really going to want that, or that's kind of a gold standard of things you need to have in there at the very least. And I had a lot of that direction from multiple people early on. And even with this game, you know um, Dave Gardner said, I like it, but where's the bench? With the up tempo basketball, can we get all the players in there, not just the starting five? And I was like, okay, we'll figure out how to do that. And I think it's a stronger game because of it. And you're just listening to feedback from people and making those changes, coming at it as much as you can, like with no ego and just saying, look, we're just trying to create something fun here. This isn't like being the president of the United States where everything is like super serious. So we're trying to make a fun game that other people would enjoy, and we're doing it together. And your voice gets heard. I've asked people for input on the name. I've asked people for input on which season to make next. It just seems smart to me
Yeah.
to do that, but it also, I think it engages the community in a way that, this is why you have a community. Otherwise, you're just a customer. But it's not that way. I feel like the community has some ownership of these games. They have an opportunity to provide that input, to feel like they're a part of the game or in the game, and that really is what open source is all about. So where in my industry, open source development, there's software out there that you're using that is actively developed by Joe Schmo down the street, and a group of other friends, who just happen to be all pitching in to try to make this thing better. And that really, in reality, is the attitude, the underlying attitude of how I approach game making. Um, I only have so many good ideas. The whole community has a ton of good ideas, and I don't use everything, but it is good to hear because sometimes it's a riff. So, like, I'll be thinking one way and be directed another way and start thinking, oh, okay, well, I don't think that's going to work for what we're trying to do overall.
Mhm.
But can I like take that and run with it a little bit and we'll see. And for most guys, just being able to be heard and to say, I can see where he listened to me and we went in that direction. That's not how I would have implemented it necessarily, but I'm glad that it's in there and to feel like you have some empowerment to be able to move a game in a direction, I think is really powerful. And so I'll continue to do it that way. But I know it must be annoying to some people that the game is moving so fast, and you know, golly, you just put out an update, but it's being literally updated multiple times a day sometimes, and you sort of get into a cycle where I just tell people don't print it on cardstock until you buy it. So
Okay.
just print it on paper because it's going to change tomorrow. If it's not for sale, it'll change at some point.
Yeah.
And once it goes on sale, it's stuck. That's just kind of how it is. But I take a lot of time before it feels like it gets to that place where it feels finished. And then, from there, then you have to start doing production, which is different than creating a prototype. So now you got to figure out how you can reproduce it over and over again.
APBA folks will know that the great Dick Seitz, the founder of the company, I mean, the idea of the game from on high that has been bestowed upon,
Yeah.
and don't talk to us about it. That's, it's kind of, we kind of laugh about the lore of all that, but really,
Mm-hmm.
with all the games going on Kickstarter, I mean, this level of transparency, it's a must. And we talk about the future of gaming and who will play and how they'll
Mm-hmm.
play. Obviously, the digital component being, so prevalent. I mean, there's still room for the tabletop aspect, and the face to face and the tangible and all that. But getting to these points, incorporating all this new data is, certainly a huge part of it. But just that conversation with folks, and you reminded me of Al Wilson, who launched Fast Drive Football
Mm-hmm.
last year, right? And he was, same thing,
Yeah.
V1.233,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going up and it's going up, and the feedback on his Facebook group, it's fantastic to see. So, I'm glad that you're, kind of helping lead that
Yeah.
new paradigm, because that's a critical bridge between, we talk about the Euro games,
Mm-hmm.
the card driven, nice colored games, Wingspan and
Mm-hmm.
Azul or whatever. I mean, any, card building, deck building, resource management, there's that world there. And I think a big part of trying to bridge that world, Phil Schwartzman, we talked to him. Phil Schwartzman is doing a baseball game that's kind of incorporating some of the Euro aspect of it, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
that group developmental aspect that seems to be, it's not only, it's just vital, it's expected, and that's the way it's going to
Yeah.
be. So I wonder what you think, how the legacy group companies might incorporate some of that thinking. We've got folks that go back to playing the game they started in 1957, and I'm not saying that they're, too old to learn. I'm not saying anything like that, because you've got very savvy folks across the age ranges. They're all on Facebook too. They play by Zoom. You got Chuck Siegert, and the leader guys at Dan Burson Games doing the war games, super responsive, very immersive conversational development. I'm just curious
Mm-hmm.
what you think, how you might approach taking the legacy brands forward. It's been a question going back to the 90s.
Um, I would, and I feel like I hear it in like Strat's new direction that they're going, right. They're talking about going in a whole new sort of data driven direction, and they're unveiling little pieces of what that's going to look like, over time. Uh, Certainly that is where kids are. So kids are in the collectible but digital collectibles, which started with my generation. It definitely started with us playing Madden and games like that, where they began to incorporate that sort of digital card collecting and things like that. So um, that definitely is a move that I don't think is going to stop because it's based off of data, it's based off of NFTs, it's based off of the blockchain. These are all things that we've heard about and they're coming and not quite here, but when they are here and when they do hit, it's going to be so pervasive that you will have needed to make a shift like that if you're a company that has to continue to make a lot of revenue in order to exist. Me, I'm just small potatoes, right? So it's just, I don't have to necessarily follow some sort of trend like that, but when you have to keep paying the bills, you need to move in those directions. And I think what that means is moving probably away from paper, or at least creating more paper on demand if you want to be nostalgic, and then moving more into digital. To me, the future is playing head to head in VR, playing in some virtual space. Even though you're playing head to head, you're in a virtual space. So actually playing card games at a virtual table. To me, that is an exciting future for directly porting what people have been doing for a long time with, meeting up in cafes or coffee shops to play board games together, and then actually being able to be apart from one another because of work, or you know after college, or whatever it is that moves you apart from one another, that you're still able to keep the community aspect of it even though you're transcending the distance, because the distance is really the issue, when you move away from one another. But if you can close that distance and keep that relationship at the table, I think to me that's a sort of going into the future. Of VR is definitely a big part, or AR, augmented reality. Kurt Roberts launched a digital game, and it's his own baseball game. And he does some interesting, kind of cool things where every at bat is affected by the previous at bat. So while you're playing this card APBA style, or it's a little bit more like baseball classics style of game. When you come up to bat the second time, your odds, your numbers have changed. The pitcher's numbers, the batter's numbers have changed. To me, that melding of playing real time baseball, to me, that's an exciting future as well. Because right now, you're just sort of using the same numbers over and over, and it doesn't feel very dynamic. It doesn't feel like the game is moving. It's kind of in this fixed atmosphere and orbit, which I think for a lot of like really older players, playing is like remembering. It's like going back to a time.
Mm.
It's like you want to hold this snapshot of 1964 or 68 or 1972. Like there was a time that you remember that you want to have, and you want to pull that out of the closet. You want to feel that. You want to put it back in the closet.
Yeah.
And then, next weekend you want to feel it again.
Yeah. Or
You
pull out
know,
the
you
photo album or whatever. Same thing.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of, I feel when I hear people, because I'm just listening to a lot of people talk on the forums,
Yeah.
and they're talking about the nostalgia.
Right. Right.
But to be quite honest, for me and my generation, there is no nostalgia. There is no nostalgia for sports.
Mm.
So little
Hmm.
nostalgia for sports. How many lockouts have we had? We are
That's right.
post free agency. Like I was born after free agency, right? So,
Yeah.
or I think the first year that free agency came to be. So I've never known sports where people didn't move.
Yeah.
I've never known baseball where the same guy played for your team for 14 years. That's so rare
Yeah.
that ever happens. And I mean, even Greg Maddox, when I was growing up, I mean, he was started somewhere else. He played for my team for a while, and he wound up in San Diego. You know what I mean? It's like uh, the greatest are not immune to going somewhere. And so to me, there's nothing nostalgic about baseball other than the game itself. I love the game and I love going to the ballpark and I love the feel of baseball, but there's no golden age for me. There's no golden age of basketball. There's only, I remember Larry Bird through my dad. And I remember the Celtics through my dad. That 85 team, I had a t shirt that came from that era,
Right.
but that's it. That's like all that I had.
No.
What I remember is Michael Jordan. But even then, it was so not nostalgic. It was like a rock concert. It wasn't nostalgia. It's not like George Mikan or Alvin Hayes or like some sort of ethereal, godlike nostalgia.
Mm.
It just was like a rock concert, and it was just bam, bam, bam through it, and it was like exciting and fun, but it wasn't nostalgic. I didn't experience it with my dad. I didn't have like a lot of memories attached to it that were super relational necessarily, just with my friends, I guess.
Mm.
But there were moments that you remember where you were and what was going on. But so much movement, just being all over the country, all over the world, whenever you're experiencing these moments, there's no nostalgia in that way. So I think that's a common experience for people who are under 55
Yeah.
is that there isn't any nostalgia for sports. And so to me, the way it has been played has been with a very nostalgic eye.
Mhm.
The way it will be played is with strategy and fun and excitement. And that is different than trying to recreate the past. And some guys go to great lengths to recreate the past, and they don't like it when the past gets all jumbled up like what I'm doing. You could play on base with a team of Babe Ruths against Mike Trouts. You have 9 Babe Ruths squaring off against 9 Mike Trouts, and that sort of ruffles the feathers because that's not recreating what has been and the glory and the wonder of baseball. But to me, Babe Ruth is not a glory and a wonder. He's a baseball player
Mhm.
who had gaudy numbers, and so does Mike Trout. So, you know, what happens if you put them on the field next to each other, or what if they hit 3-4 in the lineup? What's going to happen with that? And so I think that there's a little bit more of that that's happening. And
Mhm.
maybe that's kind of what you're talking about with the Euro style games, where games are kind of being turned upside down on their heads and they're not
Mhm.
quite as straightforward and traditional. They're more ambiguous. There's more negotiation. There's more sort of back and forth between the players, and that creates an unrealism, but it also creates a lot of fun. Uh, and the focus is more on the people who are playing the game than it is on the game itself reproducing anything.
Mhm.
So if you ask me about the future of board games, I think that that's where it's going into more of the relationship of playing games,
Mhm.
as opposed to, and then the game is fostering the relationship as opposed to you are imposing something on the game to do something for you. The game just happens to be the medium. It could be, I see it with my kids, they could be playing Uno, they could be playing this, they could be playing that. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that the game is bringing them to the table together. And so that's not the way it has been. I don't think. I think people have been coming around the game
Mhm.
and sort of molding themselves to the game. But now I think the games are just the glue that brings those human beings together. And it could be whatever game. Um, but the games that bring those people together and the games that help those people interact with one another are going to be the ones that win in the next 50 years.
So interesting. Now that's you bring again great points. And there are two things I wanted to touch on here. I guess the second point I had first, talking about how the nature of sports and fandom is kind of changing our perception of the game, our engagement with the actual professional sports.
Mhm.
so that there's less of that commitment to, it's nostalgia. There's no golden age. By the same token, I wonder, because we're talking again, going back to the Euro games and the newer games, the Kickstarter games, the Instagram folks with, shelves full and photo frame full of every conceivable theme. I feel like those games are trying to convey and I think I see a lot of nostalgia. Like again, there's a lot of historically based games. There's what is it, the Tavern of Trachtenberg or something like that, and there's a lot of the sepia tone cards and all the.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if I'm totally with you on the point that the idea of the regional flavor of teams has been blown out the window. But do you think that it will still be incumbent upon folks as they engage with a sport, because a big part of the what if is that remembrance? So if they, if you become a fan of 2019, 2020, I mean, if you are a 10-year-old today and Tom Brady is a Buccaneer and you don't even know that he was a Patriot, I mean, is it incumbent upon folks as designers to then still create that experience historically accurately, and kind of the flavor of, say, dead ball baseball, 19th century baseball, what have you, any sport, rugby, whatever, different flavors of, World Cup soccer, things of that nature. I mean, doesn't there still have to be that kind of almost teaching / preservation of history in the games? Or do you think it'll be less?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think one of the, having worked in technology for many years now, one of the things that always is a trick is that technology is going to kill something. It's kind of a trick. Technology doesn't kill anything. Technology opens up infinitely more ways to experience more things. So a lot of people probably thought ebooks were going to kill the book. People buy books like crazy. Some of it's out of nostalgia. Some of it's out of portability. And they realize that it doesn't need a battery. Like they didn't know that. They didn't know that they needed that kind of thing. Technology opens up new avenues to experience things, and it rarely closes them off. People still buy records. People my age love records. Do we know that it's not the same? Of course. You can get crystal clear quality through a different means if that's what you want. But now I have the choice. I have the choice of crystal clear quality, or I have the choice of the scratchy record. In 1974, you only had the scratchy record. You didn't have crystal clear quality. So now there's just infinitely more choice. So of course there's going to be nostalgic games. Of course, because some people are going to be like, I really dig that. I really dig like historical accuracy and these different things. But some of those games that you're talking about, even though they're sepia tone in their flavor, are they sepia tone in their mechanics, or are they turning the mechanics of the traditional war game completely upside down to where your war game is a D&D game? You know what I mean? Like it's one thing to have the look and feel of something. It's another thing to just be completely reproducing the same thing over and over again. And to me, I went back to the roots with On Base. What came out of it was not APBA. What came out of it was not Strat, even though the men who made those games started from the exact same place, played dice baseball before. I found this great article online because I was looking for a game engine for. I originally set out to make a web-based baseball game, is what I was doing. And so I started thinking about this is something I wanted to do for a long time, some sort of a management game where you could play an actual baseball game, but on the web, not in a download or in an app or something like that. So I set out to do that. And I was looking for a game engine. I thought, I was like, I got to find some way to get the play rolling and happening. And so I did a lot of research on different game mechanics and came across Dice Baseball. Never heard of it in my entire life, never played it. And it was this great historical article. And literally, they collected all of these old Dice Baseball games, put them on this page, sort of as a museum type piece. And they had asked their friends and asked different people to just, what did you used to play in the 40s when you were young? Or what was the game that was passed to us from our grandfather? And then they would just play these little dinky games, 2d6 dice, and you roll them together, and you got, you know, however many, you know, however many results, and it's totally unrealistic. Teams are batting 438 and stuff like that, so it's completely unrealistic, but fun. And so I'm like, okay, I can use this as a game engine, and then using a little bit of code, I can make it a little bit more sophisticated, right? I can add a few more if this and if that, and just a little bit more variation than what was there. And so that was really how it began. And then I created the game, built it out based on war. It still exists, but war just isn't a good thing. And then I realized and kind of stumbled upon the actual cards and dice community while I was doing all this research. And I was like, there are guys out there actually playing with paper. How would that work? And so I took the game, ported it to paper, put it out there just for people to play. And then they started giving feedback on it. And that was how On Base was born. And then, you know, 8 months later, a year later, it's an actual production game that you can purchase. The shortcomings of that game, mechanically, not shortcomings, but there were other things as I was developing it that I thought, oh, well, that would be, I want to bring out this part of baseball. I want to think about this part of the game. And so then that leads to sort of creating more and more variations of baseball using different mechanics. Can I get there using cards? How small can I make this footprint? Um, because I don't want to have a bunch of stuff. Can I play this on a plane? You know what I mean? And so those sort of questions kind of lead me to start thinking about what can I use in order. I know where I need to go. What can I use to get there? To me, there will be a nostalgic part. I went all the way back to the beginning, but what's come out of it is completely different. On Base Advance is not like any board game that I've ever seen. You don't have you don't have the ability to control and make decisions throughout the at bat like you do in that game, like you would on a video game with a controller in your hand. And so to me, that's like a perfect. It started in this place. I'm using two D10s. I'm not using anything amazing. It's just two D10 dice. That's all you need. And then you're just rolling them over and over again. But as you do that, you're sort of making your way through this sort of decision tree. And that is very video game as opposed to, sort of rolling it and letting it all play out in front of you. And then you're just watching the game from the stands. Now you're on the field. Now you're in the box. Now you're on the mound making a choice about the game. And then to me, there is sort of the old and the new. And it's just a different way to think about playing a game. But it only happens because I've been actively involved in making those choices on a video game for my whole life. I get to choose, when I want to do something other than strategic. I get to choose a swing. I get to choose uh, what pitch to throw. And so to me, that level of detail is possible. And it just sort of takes having gone through that experience, which has happened with my generation, to go through that experience of playing video games. And then can I bring that back into this sort of traditional setting? Like where can I mix and match these different things? Which I think as I look at those Euro uh, board games, they're bringing in very interesting mechanics into sort of a ho hum overall mechanic. Collecting cards and stuff like that is not a that's not a new thing necessarily in the world's history. But can we turn that on its side? Can we flip it upside down? What other little things can we add to it as a wrinkle, to make this just a little bit more complex or beautiful or uh, the subject matter, birds. I mean, you just, yeah, the subject matter is just a little bit different. maybe than what people were accustomed to, and so that throws a little wrinkle into things as well. But yeah, you're right. It's going to be some manner of traditionalism. There always will be. But I also think technology, and as the cards sort of straddle digital and paper at the same time, not either or, but both, then you're going to get some really interesting sorts of things. Somebody asked about it the other day. There's like, is there a game where I can watch a game and then play it on the tabletop
Mm.
where it's um, what I'm doing here in front of me is in response to what's happening on the video, right? So this is the way people are. That's the kind of interactivity that you're looking for. And they had those games, you pop in the VCR, the VCR tape back in the day, and all that kind of stuff. So you would do those kinds of games, but it's just sort of a different level of thinking uh, with adding in digital components. Matt McKeever did that, where they had the digital software where you could recreate any season
Mm.
or do anything that you wanted to. So you basically it's a card creator
Mm.
using any sort of season in the history of baseball. So, um, and I have a digital component to every game that I've made. There's an online dice roller. Certain components I keep just sort of reproducing, but it really shrinks the footprint uh, to where it'll play on your phone. You could play it offline, um, and it also speeds up the game, which is appealing to me personally to be able to speed up the game. But then you lose a little bit of the visceral flipping cards, and I know a lot of guys they like that
Yeah.
sort of part of it. To me, I'm there to play a game, whether I'm flipping cards or I'm rolling dice for real or not. There's something kind of cool about rolling dice, but if I'm on a plane or in an airport
Right.
or I'm on vacation, to be able to have that access where I don't have to lug around, several components or a folder or whatever, um, is kind of a cool mix and meld of that. And there's way more distance that you can go with that of melding the offline and the online. But for me, that's for my time and skill set. That's where I've been so far. Um, so I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah,
Hopefully that answers the
absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's and speaking of kind of how the technology opens these possibilities, there's this Flex NBA. They have the little flexagons and adding the
Mm,
collectability and the kind of
yeah.
board game nostalgia plus flexagons. You look at with a phone and it activates the player on the board. You kind of
Mm,
knock each other's confidence points down. It could almost be like lightsabers in sports or something.
yeah.
I mean, whatever. But I'm just curious, I mean, if you could actually strap on a helmet and now you're in Madden and these guys are
Yeah.
actually you're feeling the physical shock of football or whatever sport. I mean, do you think in terms of that and being where you come from, I mean, user experience, UX comes into play so much.
Hmm.
How much impetus do you think there is for that full immersion, uh and what's your take on some of even like the intangibles like on-field leadership and that career sim aspect? You had mentioned the game
Hmm.
that each on bat changes percentages. I mean, you've got weather, potentially home field advantage, momentum of a season. If you've got a team that's kind of modest and you get them to that what if, they start building maybe confidence through the season. Can you incorporate that elements? What's your take on that?
I think it might be a little bit more difficult with just a straight cards and dice game. I know that some people have done that. Like History Maker Baseball, I think uses sort of just a different rating system, more of a EQ, emotional intelligence kind of rating system for the different types of players, which is it's not just numbers based, it's word based, which is really a kind of a cool idea that I think it pulls it off for a lot of people. They really enjoy it. Because it gives you a different feel of the players than just, oh, he's a four. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything to you. But when you realize, you know, he's a slacker or something like that, then it becomes okay. Like this player has some personality. This player he's a real self. I think that's part of what that does. And you don't need to have watched them play or know anything about them to understand their personality, which I think is really key, especially if you're doing historical. I don't know anything about Ducky Medwick, really. I mean, I know his name, but I don't know anything about the man. But if there's a way for you to translate that to me, I know a lot about Ty Cobb because we've heard stories about Ty Cobb. So, can you translate this player's character to me? And then now I'm engaged in a totally different way. I think the blending of the digital with cards and dice, maybe not physically on the table, but if you're combining those two things in the virtual world, which it seems easier to kind of bring those two things together virtually than it does with some sort of virtual and tabletop component. Although I've never tried it, so maybe it's not that hard. I'm not sure. I haven't really ever thought in that direction. Um, but I'm thinking right off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the Out of the Park mobile app, where they're beginning to incorporate 3D elements into a text-based simulation, which is a whole like breaking new ground really in the last several years. And it just gives it a different feel. You're making text-based baseball decisions, but you're watching it happen in front of you as if it were a video game. And so that brings a whole different sort of level where I could see that being a blend of making choices on screen and then watching the football played out, um, which would bring a whole different level. Like if you're watching the play in first person that you just drew up or that you just made a decision on. When you can visually process things, it makes games like On Base Advance way easier because you can process it so much faster than you can roll and process and figure out what you're doing. So you have all those like little steps along the way that visually you're seeing it and processing it so fast that you can make another decision, and you can make six of those decisions by reading the defense. you know I'm looking at the linebacker there, I can see where they are, I know the plays in my head that I can choose, and so now I can choose those plays, and that might be four rolls on a tabletop game, but it only takes you a second and a half to sort of process that in your mind. And so there's a great, I talked about cutting corners. That's a great cutting corners, which to me is, as a tangent and an aside, as I was thinking about, sort of my process getting ready for this interview, you got to do what's right for the medium. And sometimes I feel like people are asking me to do things that are wrong for the medium. Um, Uptempo basketball is right for a tabletop basketball game because it flows. Basketball is not meant to be resolved 2 or 3 minutes per possession. It's just not. There's a shot clock. Like it's just not supposed to go that slowly. So what's what's right for the tabletop is something faster. And then there's things that you can do on the tabletop, which I know people may not know or agree with, but there are things you can do in sort of the unreality of the tabletop that you can't do online or you can't do in a video game, and vice versa. There are things in the video game, if you're making choices about where to go or who to throw it to or all those kind of things, that's super cumbersome on the tabletop, which is why those games feel that way. But when you're moving your thumbs and the guys are just moving all over the place and you hit a button and it goes where you want it to go, like that's really easy on a video game. But doing simulation, doing GM work, some of that's not easy. That's really cumbersome on a video game and a little slow and boring. But when you're like when you have that in front of you and you're doing it on the tabletop, some of those things are like really, that's like a sweet spot for what you're doing in front of you on the tabletop. So to me, when I'm designing the game, I'm looking at what makes sense. Does it make sense to go off and do another game that's trying to do a simulation, but simulations are just too darn hard to do because they're so cumbersome on the tabletop? Or am I just trying to get the flavor of the game? Can I get the flavor of this particular sport? And if I can get the flavor of the sport, then I think that people will play it,
Okay.
because we watch different sports for different reasons, right? Watching football is not the same as watching basketball, is not the same as watching baseball, and they're typically three different kinds of people. There's like a baseball guy, you know, and you have to sort of speak to the heart of the baseball guy. What do you enjoy about baseball?
Hmm.
It's the thinking, it's the strategy, it's the fact that it's a beautiful day at the ballpark and I'm watching this play out. Like that's how baseball games feel, right? And so if you don't capture some version of that and you have like fast break baseball, it's probably not going to be right for the people who love baseball. It might be right for the casual fan. And so you get some sort of like slugfest kind of game or something like that,
Hmm.
where you draw in people and they're like, I don't really like baseball, but this is fun because it doesn't feel like baseball.
Hmm.
Well, that's not going to draw your sort of core people to love your game. And the same thing, like this is not core level basketball with up tempo, but what it does is it hits enough of the notes of basketball that even guys who love the stats and stuff like that, I think they would really enjoy playing it because it doesn't give you the level of detail, but it does give you the flavor of watching the back and forth. And sometimes you're watching it like you watch those old teams from the 80s and you're like, did they ever miss? They're just running down the floor and and it's just going in all the time. You're like, what in the world? I don't remember people never missing. But that's how this game feels. And they don't actually miss very much. They miss a lot more in real life, but it doesn't feel like it when you're watching it on TV. So I think if you can get the sort of the aesthetic of each individual sport, whether there's a highlight game out there, whatever the sport, if it's cricket or if it's rugby, you have to hit the right note for it to feel like the game. And then once you do that, I think that people will look past some of the detail being missing or
Hmm.
too much detail being in there,
Hmm.
and they'll be like, well, you know, it's a lot of fun though.
Well, and I like
So,
the way you've done it, with your 3, 4 levels. Go back to strat. Basic, advanced, super advanced, APA. Basic and master. I mean, having those kind of entry points can maybe, almost work with the sport itself to kind of, you're almost kind of describing what's actual pro football, for instance.
yeah.
Trying to capture more casual fans by maybe even messing with the core of their own actual on-field
Hmm.
product, so trying to
Yeah.
maybe get people into, I love the idea of kind of shaving corners and kind of getting
Yeah.
some of that specificity out. I don't mind a long involved game where you kind of feel like you're in that back and forth. You kind of get a sense of, wow, the mental stamina it takes to almost be on top of what's
Hmm.
happening there. um, but yeah, that's you know understanding what people want from the game. And I just kind of, I think we talked a little bit about what you wanted from the game. I mean, the kind of the GM mode, it's some
Hmm.
partially of to that extent. Do you kind of see the different games as portals from one to the other, or are you just kind of saying I've got 4 products for 4 different types of fans, and they can exist in completely separate worlds?
I feel like I've got multiple products for different types of people. Um, they're they're focused on different aspects. Like the three baseball games are focused on completely different aspects of the game. Some of it, you know, you can't you can't give one the mechanic of the other. I totally started over with every one of them. And I've got another one that people have really enjoyed called Dog Days Baseball, which will be coming out at some point. I got a little sidetracked with the basketball. I'm more of an inspiration sort of designer, and so I'm always thinking, well, I'd love to do a football game. Obviously, I put together a prototype, right? But that just sort of happened. It's out there. I haven't touched it, in months. So um, it'll come back, and I'll have a better idea about something. But to me, they're all different games. Um, One, they're different sports. So as you're looking at different sports, you're looking at a different, maybe you need to bring in a different mechanic. Two, I'm growing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing a lot more research. I'm watching a lot more. I'm listening to people talk about, well, I wish I had a game that was like this. There's something on the forums recently. I wish there was a football game that you could play in an hour, but it gives you a lot of detail, which, is the holy grail of every game, right? All the detail with none of the effort. But um, is it possible?
That's
Is
it.
it possible for me to do something like that? And maybe, maybe this game mechanic with the up tempo, but maybe something else because football is not the same. Football is slow and plodding, and then bam, it's like this big thing happens, right? And it's explosive. Basketball is just on skates, back and forth and back and forth, but football is slow, pow, slow, pow. That's how the rhythm of football, and that's sort of where you live in that tension of the slow, because you're waiting for the pow, right? And so that's sort of what I try to recreate with advanced stats football is you kind of on the edge of your seat, and as you make each roll, you're getting a little bit closer, and maybe you're starting to get really close to that pow, and then it happens. You're like, oh my gosh, it's a huge play, and it can turn the game. So to me, feeling that visceral feeling of what is the core of the sport and trying to discern what is the sport, what's the rhythm of the sport. Hockey has a very different rhythm, even than basketball, although it's similar to basketball, but more graceful, slicker. It's just a different feel to hockey. And so you just really have to look at what is the sport, and then what are you trying to bring out about the sport? What are you trying to do? What's the point? So NBA Jam is not double dribble, is not NBA Live. So they're all talking about the same sport. They're all using similar mechanics of shooting and rebounding and all the different things. But what are they trying to bring out? What are they trying to let you have fun with? And I think that that's really, once you pinpoint that, then you can try to make a mechanic that allows that to come forward. Um, but until you decide on what the essence of the game is, you're just trying to recreate real life, which is a documentary. That's not necessarily entertaining necessarily. Some people, some documentaries are informative and they're good, and um, sometimes you want to watch those, but then sometimes you want a Marvel movie. You know what I mean? Like you want to stretch reality a little bit. You want to have a little bit of fun with reality or fiction, and so I think that there's lots of spaces out there to recreate uh, using the same sport, create different feels and avenues and venues for the different games, and people will, they keep buying baseball games that are all different because it pulls out some different aspect of this 150-year-old sport. You know what I mean?
So that's it. That's it. I mean, and that's what continues to amaze me. I love it. It's just that everyone's looking at that same game and that same data, and that prismatic effect of how many people see it, and that that different curvature. It's amazing. So
Yeah.
thank you for your insights. This has been absolutely fascinating, Brian. I really appreciate your games and your perspective here. I've got
Thank
a
you.
couple of links here. One for Uptempo Basketball. another for the tabletop football game, your advanced stats football. Do you have a single site where all these are?
I don't have a single site where everything is. So that's, I guess now that I'm not just doing baseball, I have to think about that. But before it was on Baseball.com. That's where you can buy the 3 baseball games. And then Uptempo Basketball.game.com is the Uptempo site. And that's where I'll be putting NCAA or WNBA, I don't know, Euro leagues. I mean, I think that the game engine can work with anything really, because the baseline stats are so generic. And then I've just got several of the little demos. The advanced stats football it's not in production, so it doesn't have an actual anything. I just use GitHub to share files and get them out there to everybody for free. So feel free to put that out there, because I really want to hear what people have to say about it. No one's really giving me any commentary on the football game, but I really want to hear what people think about it, because it's a little bit of a different take on football. And yeah.
Looking forward to trying out, Brian. Again, thank you so much, sir. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope to catch up with you later with as your portfolio expands.
Yeah, I hope it expands. I appreciate the time. Thank you.